Seguimos en Mobile World Congress cubriendo el sector de las telecomunicaciones a través del Mobile World Congress, el evento que se celebra en Barcelona. Nos visita una empresa que se llama UBIqube y nos visita Nabil. Nabil, welcome to Telesemana.
Thank you very much, Rafael.
So we're here to discuss OSS on an NFV environment. So tell us why the operators that are trying to transform these OSS systems for years, now they have a new challenge when it comes to NFV, and why perhaps NFV might actually accomplish something that we have not seen in the past few years, which is that actually we will transform OSS finally.
Well, thank you very much for this question. I think the key element here in NFV is what I call the multi-vendor factor in administration. And you know, in traditional OSS system, the vendor landscape is fairly mastered in the sense that we control the number of vendors we are onboarding when we decide to onboard them as a telecom service provider, and we ask our OSS partner to basically customize the software that will operate those vendors. What's disruptive about the NFV trend and all this virtualization trend is that what you onboard day one as a vendor may be a very different vendor in 6 months' time, because you know the point of NFV and virtualization of function is to be able to onboard new functions as they go. Well, that poses a new problem, which is the one that you have to be from day one completely multi-vendor in your orchestration ability as an OSS vendor. And that's absolutely disruptive for the OSS industry, and also a challenge obviously for the telecom service providers. And that's exactly where we fit in, and we try to solve the problem.
Now you mentioned the orchestration.
Right.
And the orchestration is a new element that it's bring up to the table because of the NFV. Somebody has to has to manage all this NFV infrastructure, also the legacy infrastructure that the operator already has. Why is this orchestration a critical component of this infrastructure?
Well, you know, orchestration is a term that's still vague in the minds of a number of people in the industry right now, because for me it's basically a collision of different industries and different cultures. It's the IT culture with the DevOps and those kind of trends. It's the OSS culture, it's the networking culture, which is more of a network management system culture. These three cultures collide, and that sort of collision created the need for what we call orchestration, in the sense that one single software system that glues together all the different elements. That's what I personally call orchestration. Now, the other key here is that, contrary to the way we've segmented things in management so far, where you have basically the network domain management layer, which is really box driven, and then suddenly you get into the service per se. Here, because of the fact that we are now rendering the system completely vertical, whereby you can consider a service from the design of the service down to the element that you're trying to control when activating the service, you're more service-centric as a culture. And orchestration is a terminology that comes from the service-centric culture. Okay. So these are all the phenomena that are happening. The point here is that software is about culture. That's what I claim. If you look at the dominant software players we know in the consumer industry, clearly it's a culture battle. It's one culture versus the other one. And we're starting to see the same thing in the networking industry, and that's very exciting. Orchestration is an illustration of that new trend.
Okay. Now, when you talk about NFV, or not relying so much on hardware,
right,
because as you were saying, things may change, can we expect less fragmentation on the OSS domain because of moving to a software-based domain? Or fragmentation would still be there in terms of having one provider that needs to be running everything and not being able to integrate with other, or having integration issues all the time when you need to integrate new things into the network? How is that going to change with NFV, with an NFV environment?
Well, I think you will. I think fragmentation will remain, but I think the reason for fragmentation will change.
So there will be fragmentation?
I think there will remain fragmentation, okay, but I think the fragmentation will be less technology-driven and more business process expertise-driven. More like what you would see in the IT integrators world, where you have indeed fragmentation, but their fragmentation is less about XYZ technology, but more about, I'm the expert of such and such business process, so let me help you and let me design the software for you. So I see the industry in our space evolve in a similar way, whereby those players would all develop on a common substrate, on a common framework, but then every single one of them would be able to add intellectual property for the service provider specifically. So you will keep fragmentation, but at a different level.
Okay, so one of the things that usually people point to the operators is that their systems are inefficient, slow, and then when the promise of NFV arrives, it says you're going to be more agile, more efficient with the resources, and so on. How does that apply to OSS? I mean, or to the transformation of the OSS systems, where things need to be commissioned for very long periods of time, and so on. Are those things going to be more efficient with NFV?
Well, hopefully yes.
Okay.
Hopefully yes. But that's, I don't know if I subscribe to the statement or the analysis in such a monolithic way, because in my opinion you're right and wrong. And let me tell you why.
Not me, I mean, I'm just,
the
industry.
The impression, the industry. If I look at the consumer segment, we're at Mobile World Congress, take the mobile segment. I think the software and OSS technology you find for the consumer in mobile is extremely sophisticated and extremely mature. I think I wouldn't consider that those guys or that segment of the industry lacks efficiency or is non-efficient or anything like that. Or agile. But, because we're living agility in mobile, right?
Yeah.
But on the other hand, as there are two other segments of the industry where I think the industry is absolutely right. There's a lack of efficiency and lack of agility. That would be the metro and the backbone, what I call the transport switching and routing piece. Yeah. And the second segment would be the B2B edge of the network space, where instead we're not talking now mobile or wireline anymore. We're talking about a box dedicated to a particular function, like maybe security, like and so on and so forth. That's a very particular space where service providers are selling value-added service to the enterprise market. Those two, the backbone, metro, and that edge service or value-added service-oriented space, would correspond to what you're describing. I would fully concur that they lack efficiency, and I think NFV and virtualization in general and orchestration are all going to be bringing that segment of the industry to a next level of maturity.
Now, let me go back to a point you mentioned in another question that I asked you, and you said that instead of having providers that are going to be providing different technology, when I was talking about fragmentation,
right.
You mentioned that fragmentation is going to go from technology ABC to expertise X, Y, and Z.
That's how I see it, yeah.
Right. So does that mean that we can expect from now on the emergence of companies that are not usually related to OSS on the telco space to come in to offer this type of expertise coming from other software, IT usually?
Yes. And we're seeing it already. I am seeing it. Yes, absolutely. And most, whether small or extremely large, without naming names, most see in that transition a fantastic opportunity for them to shine, because they do have strong IT expertise in building business-oriented systems. So yes, absolutely. I think that's a major trend in the industry.
Now, which companies do you think might benefit, if you can name any, besides UBIqube, can benefit from this transition that are not telco-driven, but are on the IT side and then might be on the telco space due to this changing paradigm that NFV is bringing to the table?
So I mean, again, I think, first of all, where UBIqube sits, we sit at what I'd call the framework layer. The idea of making that industry less technology specific, less vertical, and to have fragmentation happen at the higher layer where people with business expertise would code software. Yeah. For them to code software, they need a substrate. We fit right there. We are more in the layer of, we propose a framework to the industry, whether it's networking, Internet of Things, smart grid, name it, machine to machine, for the whole community to come and code on top of that, so that there's basically a disconnect between the technology dependency and the business expertise. Now, who would benefit without naming names? I think, frankly, the big IT integrator shops, the big ones, will all benefit. And we're seeing them gear up for that. We're seeing them making acquisitions. We're seeing them reorganize internally with a bigger focus on their telecom practice, what some call their CMT. So we're seeing that. Recruitment of talent left and right with a lot of telecom expertise. I think that's going to be extremely challenging for the legacy established OSS vendors. Okay. OSS vendors. I see that as a major threat to them, more so than what the network equipment vendors are trying to do by getting themselves up to software with orchestration. I think the reality for the network equipment vendors is that most of them will come up with the SDN layer fixed. The orchestration will lie somewhere else, despite what I think. It's going to lie in the hands of someone else. But what will happen though is that I think there's going to be a fight between the established OSS vendors and the newcomers in the space, the IT integrators.
No, because you're in some way in between those two worlds,
right?
Because you're going to be allowing these other companies actually to talk to the operator, so to speak.
Yes.
What would be your recommendation for the traditional OSS providers if you were to provide some expertise or some consultancy? Is there any way you can tell these guys on how to adapt to this new world where, for what you're saying, if the big guys from IT are coming and there's going to be that shift and you're, you know, what you're expecting happens, obviously these guys are going to have an advantage, competitive advantage with the legacy providers.
Right.
Is there any way these guys can adapt to this?
God, that's a tough question, and I feel it's beyond my skill set to answer that question.
No, just, I was wondering if you had
that would be an unqualified, opinionated opinion. So I don't have any on the matter.
Appreciate your honesty.
Yes.
Excellent. All right, Nabil, we'll leave it here. We'll leave people to you know, take conclusions on what you just said, and we'll try to figure out how to advise the OSS traditional vendors on how to proceed.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Rafael.
Thanks.
Thank you.